Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
People feel strangers in their own land because they're basically told that their neighbourhoods and their lifestyles have to change to accommodate a mass influx of people who are not from that area.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studios at GB News here in the heart of Westminster. Is freedom of speech in the UK under threat? Senior figures in the US think so. Here's what the Vice President J.D. Vance told the Munich Security Conference earlier this year.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you.
And over here, some of our leading politicians, notably Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, he's also worried. He compared the UK to North Korea.
So I've come today as well to be a klaxon, to say to you, don't allow piece by piece this to happen here in America. And you would be doing us and yourselves and all freedom-loving people a favour if your politicians and your businesses said to the British government, you've simply got this wrong. At what point did we become North Korea? Well, I think the Irish comedy writer found that out 2 days ago at Heathrow Airport.
But would North Korea allow a protest like the one we saw last weekend between 110,000 people and 150,000 people descended on the streets of London to a Unite the Kingdom rally? All of this comes in the context of last week's assassination of Donald Trump's ally, the influencer Charlie Kirk, who was shot dead at Utah Valley University. So this poses a question for our podcast. Is freedom of speech under threat, and where should the line be drawn? Are opposing views being suppressed by those who simply don't want to hear them? I'm really pleased to be joined by Claire Fox, Baroness Fox of Buckley, the director of the Academy of Ideas and the author of a book called I Find That Offensive! Claire, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
It's great to be on. I usually listening, so it's nice to be here.
Love to have you on. I enjoyed your Wikipedia entry. It says this: a lifelong Eurosceptic. She was previously a member of the Trotskyist British Revolutionary Communist Party, but later began identifying as a libertarian. That's a great intro of a life story.
It is, although it is Wikipedia's version of my life and therefore not necessarily accurate. I was in the Revolutionary Communist Party. I don't know that I was a lifelong Eurosceptic, and I don't use the term libertarian. But I do believe in freedom.
Are we like North Korea? Is Nigel Farage right?
No, I think that was a bit of hyperbole on Nigel's part. But I think the point he was making was that we often in this country lecture the rest of the world, like North Korea, or maybe a bit more realistically, places like Hong Kong, and say, oh, it's terrible, people are put in prison for their views. And then you have to kind of go gulp. We might have had a bit of that ourselves.
Lucy Connolly.
Exactly, the Lucy Connolly case. But the figures are stark. I mean, 30 arrests a day for speech crimes. And even The Economist.
30 a day?
I know. I mean, The Economist said, what? This is mad. And therefore, The Economist actually said, Europe's free speech crisis on a front page a few months ago. And I just think it indicates that across the political spectrum, actually, those people who are following this carefully are anxious that we've become much more casual about saying that speech, when people say things like, I believe in free speech, but not hate speech. And then when you ask them to define hate, you discover that their version of hate is often views that they find hateful. And it's entirely subjective. And actually, the law itself messes around with this. And so I do think the police have got themselves into a position where they're knocking on the doors of ordinary people saying, we've just read your tweets.
And that's why you see Mark Rowley, the head of the Met, saying, give us some guidance. And we do hear from Number 10 repeatedly. They want the police to focus on priorities, muggings, attacks, or the shoplifting, the stuff that matters. The court of the police, maybe less so than being offended by a tweet. I mean, look at the Lucy Connolly situation. Was that not due to legal advice? Maybe if she hadn't pled guilty, a jury might have got her off?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that if she'd have gone to a jury, she would have stood a very good chance of getting off. I think there's an argument about whether she should have been arrested. I mean, this is a slightly different point. I think that once she was arrested and pleaded guilty, it's different. Although I think then she was unfairly treated. She was given the absolute maximum you could get, and she wasn't allowed out on bail and all that. She's now out early, and that feels to me a bit more like, vindictive. And we had got, after all, the Prime Minister going on during that time, basically threatening that everybody, they would be used as exemplars of what would happen if you incited. Now, this is an interesting phrase, isn't it? Incited, because incitement is usually associated with quite narrowly, saying, Mrs. Smith lives over there, the gun's in the corner, go and do something, But this is incitement to hatred. And so consequently, it becomes much more murky as to whether it actually led to any action.
Of course, you said burn down a hotel for all I cared.
I mean, the for all I cared does seem to me to be a fairly key phrase.
For me, that did qualify.
I know. I mean, because that's a kind of heated, angry, unpleasant sentiment, you might say.
Which he deleted the next day. Now, Keir Starmer, when he was DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, also said, I think back in 2014, the lawyers, barristers, prosecutors should allow for an intemperate tweet after a few drinks that's deleted the next morning. And that, to me, is exactly what happened in the case of Lucy Connolly.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about that horrible phrase, the Overton window has shifted, and in many ways it has, in the direction of... I mean, it basically means that you thought it was open there, and then it's kind of like suddenly over there. Anyway, I'm not going to overdo the explanation, but what it does mean, we say it about something like immigration, which, a few... only maybe last year saying we should be deporting tens of thousands of people would have been considered to be absolutely extraordinary. And now even the Labour Party is saying it, even if they're not doing it, because they either think things move. But the opposite has happened on free speech, I think, which is that we now have got to a situation where a more liberal attitude to free speech as a foundational value of democracy is now shifted. And it's very much, I believe in free speech, but. And so it's very difficult to take Keir Starmer seriously when he says, we are a country that's based on the foundation of free speech, when practically every piece of legislation that I have to do with in the Lords, let alone a culture, by the way, just brings in this chilling impact.
We're going to come to some new legislation out this week on that very point. Just going finally on this issue of twittering. I mean, I think that for me, the line may have been crossed by the arrest of the Father Ted writer, Graham Linehan, by 5 armed policemen at Heathrow. They're armed against Heathrow, I get that. But he was tweeting some remarks about a row with on the trans issue from America, read by someone here, arrested on arrival here. That's extraordinary, I think.
3
and
tweets.
He's not British, he's Irish.
No, 3 tweets, and he was treated as though he was a major threat, like a terrorist, effectively. And in view of the fact that we have a situation in which people who actually do represent a terrorist threat to this country is sometimes treated with kid gloves or ignored, or somehow we miss them.
Well, they're human rights.
They go over to the prevent strategists who then say carry on. And yet
No,
here we have
say carry on. They would.
No, but they would say carry on your life. We'll kind of come and see us in a few weeks. I don't mean carry on. Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is we prevent has been exposed as not being preventing anything, and then we have a situation where through speech, I think what we've got to be very clear about, and this is, you started off by mentioning Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was an influencer who many young people who the Academy of Ideas work with knew about. And one of the things that they admired was not necessarily what he was arguing, but that he was prepared to argue, and that he didn't actually hide away from his political opponents. And he was, he was gunned down and massacred in that way. He was on a campus tour going around saying, come on, tell me what you think and I'll argue back. And that the spirit of that, which is free speech, encouraging people to have it out in the open, is absolutely considered to be almost dangerous on university campuses. I mean, they'll sort of say, oh, well, we know we don't want to inflame emotions. we don't want to cause psychological harm to
Upset
people.
people hearing it.
Exactly. And so consequently, people suppress these ideas. And actually, to be honest, if you suppress ideas, they fester.
But the law here is such that if you say something and someone just feels offended by that, the police can act.
Yeah, they can. I mean, that's
how
what
it
it
is.
is. Because they've actually got in the legislation, and by the way, the Online Safety Act is even worse because it accepts that harm can now include psychological harm. Nobody can define what that is. And once you do that, you conflate words and actions. In other words, when you get those kind of progressive activists who are particularly irritating, who go around saying speech is violence, and so therefore if Kathleen Stock turns up at my university, it's like an act of violence being done to me, then you actually are in a situation whereby if you can't tell the difference between words and violence, then you can use violence just like you can use words. And I'm afraid we can see the brutality of where that can lead. But by the way, I do want to say that I think some of the reaction to Charlie Kirk from people who maybe are fed up of cancel culture, having silenced particularly right-leaning opinions, a lot of the reaction, both in America and actually in the UK, is to say anyone who says any of those horrible things excusing Charlie Kirk's murder, which is abhorrent, but that they should be sacked, they should be locked up, they should be done away with. And I think the problem then is that we get to a situation where we now ourselves, even amongst a free speech fraternity, end up with a free speech for me but not for thee, and also accepting that they can't tell the difference because they're saying that act of assassination and violence was the same on a par with violent speech. Now, that is exactly what those kind of leftish identitarian progressives said. And I just think that it's very dangerous when you basically start trying to have a tit-for-tat cancel culture going on and everybody trying to silence everybody else.
When you hear Keir Starmer describing people protesting after the Southport attacks last year as far right, what do you think about that? I note, by the way, that Number 10, as of this week, isn't saying that the Unite the Kingdom march last weekend was far right, and that's probably because they recognise the problem of saying that. People get really upset, don't they, when they hear that?
Yeah, because I think, first of all, it's made a mockery of the term far right. It destroys language. I mean, you actually get to a point where you can no longer accurately describe some people who are far right, because if you've called everybody far right, then you've got people at Epping, the pink ladies, walking around saying we aren't far right, or more mockingly, we're all far right because we're right, because it's become a joke, and you'll get lefty feminists who are gender critical saying, yeah, I'm far right Nazi, because therefore the words become meaningless because you just know that it's used to demonize you and to shut you up. But the danger with the way that the government, I think, or with Keir Starmer dealt with the Unite the Kingdom march was that he basically tried to imply that it led to violence against the police. And I just think it was a complete mischaracterization. I mean, I actually think, and from all accounts of people I know who were there, that there was far more than 150,000. I think the 3 million is a bit overstating it, but I think there could well have been up to 500,000 people. It was a huge demonstration.
Well, the joke is the police always slightly underestimate numbers, and the
organisers always go a bit mad.
But
But Trevor Phillips, I thought, made some excellent points because he said, I decided to go down and talk to people. And the most important thing you have to know is that they were ordinary people, lots of families. And we've got to remember that whatever one thinks about the organisers, Tommy Robinson et al., this was actually a free speech. They called it on the basis of free speech. And the people I know who were there tell me, and I also watched a lot of the GB News reports as well, that most people were just saying, I'm here because I'm so fed up of people telling me I can't say what I think and having to almost apologise for who I am and what my beliefs are.
Sick of that, aren't they?
And they're really furious about that. And also they were saying it's such a relief to not have to apologise, to be able to turn up here, be myself, be a patriotic Brit, be worried about maybe asylum hotels, but, worried about lots of things without actually having to explain that I'm not far right and that I'm not about to start a riot. And I'm here with the kids because I want to show them there's a lot of other people like us.
No.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living. And maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of Tally Money, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is Tally Money?
Well, Bev, with Tally Money, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at Tally Money. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver, and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
Sir Keir Starmer, in his last cabinet before the conference break, which we're in now, said this week that the UK is in the fight of our times between patriotic national renewal and decline and toxic division. He said there are people around the country who will have seen that march led by a convicted criminal who feel intimidated due to the colour of their skin. It seems he's picking sides in this.
I think that was a very unwise thing for him to say because, as I've pointed out, that's not what the march was about.
No.
It's also the case that there are a core, a tiny, not tiny, but a minority who are racist. No, but there are people who see skin colour and see that as a problem. That is absolutely not what has driven the fury around either the illegal migration and the inability of the government or any government to stop, to control the borders, stop the boats, but also the concern about mass migration and the absolute sense in which people do genuinely, to quote Sir Keir, feel strangers in their own land. I mean, people feel strangers in their own land because they're basically told that their neighbourhoods and their lifestyles have to change to accommodate a mass influx of people who are not from that area. That's not a skin colour issue. And also you get to, I mean, I want to make it clear, if the majority of people on a demonstration are white, this does not make it white supremacists. We live in the UK. It's a predominantly white country. It's not something you should apologise for. It's not an achievement. You're just born with a skin colour any more than you should be hating on people because of their skin colour. But the tensions around a mass migration policy that happened behind the backs of the electorate means that people are very resentful of the way they're being treated.
I was on that simple point. Having covered this for GB News and for the Telegraph before that, it strikes me that often the tensions are created by the authorities not being open about the changes to people's communities. So a hotel is shut down, migrants are moved in, we don't know where they're from, they can come and go. That is going to create concern for people. You hear women not wanting to go jogging in the park because they're not sure who's there. They don't feel safe. And people feel, I think, that the state is not looking after them, and they're allowing this to happen. If they were more open about where you were going to cite migrants, then there might be more of an acceptance among local people.
Well, at least it wouldn't create this sense of things happening behind people's backs. I mean, you'll know this. I mean, somebody I know, they had some family event organised, a christening in a local hotel, and it just got cancelled and there was kind of no explanation. And they kind of were asked, they didn't, I think, had anything to do with it. But when they found out that the hotel was being used to house migrants, they were furious because it was the local hotel where all those kind of things happened. And they felt, in a way, robbed, but also treated like, mugs because they weren't told why. I think we've seen that sense in which they don't trust the public. So, in example, when we got to a situation where the Afghan situation, where they actually sneaked in thousands of Afghan people because they'd messed up and published something. They didn't even tell Parliament. But they also had a discussion in which they said, we don't want the public to know where we're placing them because it might cause tensions. Exactly. They actually have that situation. We get to a situation, and I think this is what happened absolutely with Southport, which is they thought, we can't say anything about who the murderer was because we don't trust the public with that information. And if we tell them, it might lead to civil unrest. Actually, the opposite is the case. If you suppress information to the public, you basically think, are untrustworthy, then you actually create a massive chasm between the elites and ordinary people who just feel totally
cut off from it.
cut off.
I think that has changed. The dreadful attacks in Liverpool, we immediately knew the suspects
Exactly.
details. We didn't know over Southport, and I think they have changed the guidance on that. Take a step back here. Do you think that the state just doesn't trust us?
No, well, that's what I genuinely think. They don't.
They probably like us people, because we pay our taxes and stuff, but they just don't like us. They don't trust the Brits. Is that right? Is that a trust issue?
I
worth of us. Is that? Am I being completely bonkers?
No, you get the impression the whole time that there's not just a sneer, but that they actually think, oh, who are these people? You know, you can imagine looking at that United Kingdom thing like, oh, who are they?
Yeah.
They did it after Brexit. We've seen it all the way through, which is, who are they? They don't recognise that. They're in a bubble. There's literally a bubble. And I think as a consequence, they have developed a kind of dehumanized version of what people are. It just cannot penetrate into their mind why anyone would put up a flag. You know what I mean? It's like, they'll say, oh, you know, as indeed we had one of the ministers saying recently, oh, we've got flags all over our house. We have bunting. It sounded like a lunatic, because nobody does that, right? But they can't.
I'm pro-bunting.
Very good. But they don't understand that people are longing to belong to the country that they are part of. And they have a real sort of contempt and distaste, even aesthetically, for the kind of things that people like. You know, that's why they're always so sort of like keen to sanitize football. You know, they hate things like gambling. They're determined to stamp down in a Puritan-like way on people eating the wrong kind of junk food and not drizzling everything with olive oil, according to Jamie Oliver, and so on and so forth. So, there's a kind of form of snobbery that's basically anti-working class as we would have understood it. And even when they don't understand like why Nigel Farage is so popular, they kind of look at him and think, oh, he's such a kind of uncouth type. You know, why would anyone like him when we've got all these? I actually find it despicable. And I do think that the reason why people feel like they are strangers in their own land is that they realise that the traditions, the culture, the history and the background, and by the way, this is a British people, some of whom are from ethnic minorities. Guess what? And they exactly also came to this country, wanted to be British, became British, and they also are looked down at.
So there's distaste for the flag is strange, isn't it? I've been driving around the UK a lot over the summer, and I have seen everywhere. I mean, particularly going through bits of Birmingham on the M6 going north and south.
I mean, it's an odd thing to do in a way.
Union flag. Why are people flying Union flags and St George's flags from lampposts?
I think it's become popular because it's a positive thing that you can do to demonstrate that you shouldn't be ignored, and that actually you're not embarrassed about being British
or English.
I mean, it is mainly English flag
thing.
But I think it's because there's been a particular attack on the English flag over the. You know, if you wrap yourself in a Welsh flag or a Scottish saltire, everybody kind of thinks you're
funny.
Yeah, but they also think, oh, how interesting Celts. You know what I mean? Type thing. The English flag has got a particular association with racism, and obviously, you know, God, I got into so many.
Obviously wrong.
No, exactly, but it's also
claimed.
Just to be honest about it. You know, and that's in the 80s, and when I was sort of first involved in politics. Yes, I was involved in left-wing politics, but I was involved in anti-racism, and a lot of those absolutely open, Zekiling National Front types wore the flag, right? But we also know it's the Emily Thornberry kind of like, you know, that you remember that famous thing where she saw a flag outside, and she basically, Emily Thornberry combined with Gordon Brown and this woman's a bigot. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. They got this in their head. So ordinary people are trying to fight back. By the way, I think it's just a very positive thing. Putting the flags up is a way for people to express some form of solidarity with each other. And a lot of the people who are involved in putting up the flags are also saying, we want to rebuild the civic bonds in our community. And they actually say things like, oh, yeah, we also help out at the local food bank, or we're helping do litter pickups, and so on and so forth. So there's something about those people who've been marginalised and thrown out to the side of society, treated like dirt, basically, and looked down on, saying, no, we want to rebuild a pride in the place that we're from.
Re-own your flag.
Take back
control.
Control!
Oh, don't.
I know, but there's a point there.
Brexit memories by saying that. You mentioned earlier your role as this watchdog against anything impinging on our freedom of speech. I was looking through a bill published this week by the government called the Public Office Accountability Bill. It's been written up as the Hillsborough Law. Now, Hillsborough, of course, was this tragedy in 1989 when dozens of Liverpool fans, and I'm a Liverpool fan, were killed at the Hillsborough football ground. And there's been the fans have been fighting with justice correctly. And it's great that there might be something on a statute book to recognise that. But just going through the detail here, I'm looking at Chapter 3, misleading the public. It says this: the public authority or public official commits an offence if, in their capacity as such, an authority or official act with the intention of misleading the public or are reckless as to whether their act will do so. They now ought to know that their act is seriously improper. This is quite a big reach here by the state, and it's done under the cover of the Hillsborough Law, which is really important to get justice for those families. Have you seen this yet?
I know that it's on the table of bills that I've got to pick up to read over the next few weeks.
Reach by the state.
It's a massive reach,
because it could mean that that you have officials don't want to say what they think may have happened in case they're found to be wrong.
This is part of the problem is that they're trying to legislate on something which actually is not legislatable in quite the way that they think. And I do think behind the backs of people who obviously want to do the right thing, they can sneak things in. I mean, who is going to? I mean, just to clarify, I mean, the Hillsborough scandal was a massive cover-up. Yes. It was an official cover-up. People watching their backs, and they lied to the families. And then what's worse was they tried to blame the victims. Yes. If you remember,
they were drunk.
Exactly, and it was a horrible situation. And I'm from the area, so I remember it incredibly vividly. But I also think that very often with legislation, there is a kind of emotive headline, and then you're meant to pause and not go along with it. I mean, I don't think that this bill, by the way, will force officialdom to suddenly stop being honest with the public. I mean, that's the last thing that happens. But if you make this law that you've got to, if every word that you say you can be actually prosecuted, they'll just sit there and not say anything.
Well, so the government says this, and I raised this with the government this week. They said that this is about changing the balance of power so the state can never hide from people. So they're twisting it back onto the critics, saying, no, this is about giving the power to those affected. These offences are aimed at those who seek to cover up the truth. This is a government letter to serve working people. It's for serious breaches. So they're trying to stop cover-ups, right?
Yeah.
But in truth, it will mean people will get less information.
No,
that's actual truth.
That's what I'm trying to say. Is I don't think the law can force public officials to be honest. No. We need a new culture, and once you start legislating in this way, it will lead to more behind the scenes secrecy, people not being frightened to actually have an open and frank conversation. Because if you're going to be honest with the public, you basically need to chat away. You don't want to think that every word he says will be written down and used against you, as it were. And I think this is what this will lead to. But also, it is true that I just wanted to stress that, say, for example, the Online Safety Act, when that bill came in, we were told, we carry on being told, that this was about protecting children from the worst, horrible, nasty that you could possibly find online.
And critics of it are like Jimmy Savile.
Exactly. But actually, I read the bill, and only 20% of it had anything to do with protecting children. And if they'd confined themselves to that 20%, as it were, then there might have been a discussion that you could negotiate around. But it's the rest of the bill that's the problem, and we've already seen. I don't want to rehearse all that, but it genuinely will be a census charter, and it will allow people to have to justify the removal of content that's politically inconvenient or difficult or what have you. But whenever you say that, they say, "Oh, so you don't care about children? You want to exactly." And so that's a very awkward. That's what happens. So you can imagine that when this comes into the Lords, and I stand up and I say, "I just want to raise the problem with Chapter 3. Can I make a query?" They'll say, "There are people here who just do not understand the suffering and the agony of the Hillsborough families, who want to hide secrets from them." And that's why they'll do it. And then
they'll demonize you for it.
Yeah, and all the parliamentarians will sit there thinking, I'm not going to be the one who does it. Are you going to be the one who did it? And it makes it very difficult then. So already, before it's become law, it has the impact of chilling the debate about what should be law by phrasing it in this way.
And we go back to the beginning. We all want the justice for the Hillsborough families, definitely, and we don't want those what happened to them to happen to anybody else. But the question is this an overreach?
Exactly, and also the role of lawmakers is not to use the excuse of a big issue to throw at it a whole range of draconian and authoritarian measures, sometimes not intentionally, but sometimes with unintended consequences. It's up to us to scrutinise and say, no, this is wrong.
You mentioned that claim about labelling Jimmy Savile. That was used by a cabinet minister against Nigel Farage, the bête noire for the left at the moment. You know Nigel Farage quite well. You were a Brexit Party MEP. He's an outsider. He's someone who proclaims he's going to shake it up. I think he might want to scrap the Online Safety Act, leave the ECHR. Has he got it in him to do it, do you think? You know him pretty well.
I don't know that I know him pretty well, but I have to say that I was in the Brexit Party for, I think, 7 or 8 months because luckily Nigel Farage did lead us out of the European Union, so I'll give him that. Look, I am excited by the political realignment that's happening at the moment and the shake-up. I mean, I have become so frustrated by the mainstream parties and Labour's, absolute implosion in such a short time. I didn't anticipate it would be this quick, but I don't feel as though they have it in them to run the country. And they did sow out ordinary working people. They bought into some, identitarianism on the one side and a sort of technocratic, empty managerialism on the other. What an unhappy marriage that's proved to be. And they're just incompetent, apart from everything else. They don't seem to be able to know what to do.
The scale of their majority.
Majority, nothing. And the Tories deserve the kind of the collapse that they've had because they betrayed all those 2019 voters.
Why can Farage do that better than anyone else?
But all I'm saying is that it's not Farage. What's happened is that it's happening around Europe, but what's happened is that ordinary people have had enough, and they basically are using reform as the vehicle through which they say this, not in a silly protest votey type way, but in it right. We're going to give it a go. We're going to go in there.
Nothing else working.
Nothing's working. So we're going to. And people will say it's a wrecking ball. Hopefully, it'll be a wrecking ball that you can build something from. And I think that, in that sense, reforms rise in the polls is an exciting new chapter in politics. I think that, as it were, the 20th century, the long 20th century, is sort of over. We're into a new era of politics. I think there are populist revolts all around the world. And they aren't necessarily clear ideologically, but they do embody what democracy is really all about. And one of the things that I've learned from being in Parliament in the last 5 years is that democracy is skating on thin ice. Too many things are handed over to the centre. It's too many pieces of legislation. You just sort of say, oh, it's all right, trust the ministers. There's Henry VIII powers. There's all sorts of things like that. They would do anything rather than face the electorate. That's what they like, the ECHR. That's what they like. The political, well, at the moment, the government, but the political class, the political elite, at the moment.
The Tories, the old
Labour Tories, they basically have done everything to ring fence off decision-making from the attention or the accountability to ordinary people. And that's what being in the EU was all about. But it didn't end when we left the EU. And so they carry on. So I really, really do think that democracy needs an injection of energy. And the people who can do that are the demos. That's what happens.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who are propelling reform forward.
The hurdle to do that is so much greater than on the continent because we don't have proportional representation.
I know, but isn't it?
You need to get 32% in the ballot.
But let's be honest. What happened at the last election when Reform got those MPs was they suddenly broke the mould of the first past the post thing. And suddenly everybody went, oh, we can do it without having to change the electoral system.
It's a big ask.
It's a big ask.
Big ask.
But look, I'm looking forward. I'm from Wales, and the idea that the Senate is going to fall to Reform is exciting. I mean, the free speech issue, and to go back to it, but to link it up, is people want to have their say. They want to be treated with respect. They want to be listened to. It doesn't mean that you have to go along with everything they say. Or what you don't do is to sort of sneer at people. That's what the state does all the time. And the one thing that, any new party, whichever it is, that breaks through needs to be able to do is to see that they are the servants of the masters, and the masters are the people, ordinary people. And so when they are silenced, when they're told to shut up, when they're told you can't say that all the time, and we didn't kind of, I can't let this whole thing go without mentioning, equality, diversity and inclusion. Oh, yeah. Every workplace in the country, you don't need laws to shut people up. You have equality, diversity and inclusion officers wandering around, policing what you say at work. People are looking over their shoulder. You look at all the employment tribunals at the moment. So many of them are based on speech offences. People saying, so-and-so said this, and it's like an act of violence. People are actually terrified that they're going to say the wrong thing, or they can't believe it. They say something in some work WhatsApp group, and the next minute they know they're hauled before HR. HR are a monstrous growth industry. I think it's the second largest HR industry in the world is in the UK. So the one thing we're growing on is human resource apparatchiks. Can you believe it? And when even the government today, I heard some Labour MPs say, employment's going up, and then you find out it's public sector employment. And that is not the same as growth. And so these public sector organisations who spend all their time sending people on training for the public sector equality duty. I mean, North Korea is an exaggeration, but there is something very Stalinist about the whole thing. They were in the...
allowed to happen. We allow companies. It's not the government now, it's the companies.
Exactly. And the employment rights bill that's just about to, go through, and which a lot of us have been fighting against all aspects. Again, dressed up as workers' rights. I mean, how can you argue against workers' rights until you read the bill? And then you discover this is trade union bureaucrats' rights, and actually ordinary workers are going to suffer very badly. And a lot of it is going to be about shaping behaviour. So I just, I can do a little advert now, because I do think that when people went on that march of the weekend, but also when I hope that many of the GB News viewers and listeners will come along to our Battle of Ideas Festival, where, of course, GB News will be there. Free Speech Nation's going to be there. But we have 100 panel debates, 400 speakers, thousands of people across the political spectrum.
What's the website for that, Claire?
And it's I can't even remember, battleofideas.org.uk, and sign up. There's actually special tickets. But the reason I'm saying it is because you want to feel a sense of solidarity that you can argue without being shut up. So it's not that I do not want an echo chamber. I'm not interested in that. I want a place where you can argue and have it out in public and know that you won't be treated or like a child, infantilized or treated with contempt.
Well, there's no contempt here, Claire Fox. That has been one of the best podcasts I've ever done. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Griff.
Thank you for spending your time with us. That's Baroness Fox of Buckley. Do let me know what you thought of what Claire Fox had to say. I tweeted Chris of Hope on X. Are you on Twitter, Claire?
Oh, I am indeed.
What's your...
Fox_Claire.
Fox_Claire. Do tweet us all. Get involved. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. If you enjoyed this show as much as I have done, please tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, give us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or elsewhere to help other people to find this podcast. Thank the great team of colleagues at GB News behind this podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh, they're the overlords, and the podcast worker bees, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan, who buzz away finding the best stuff for you each week. And most importantly, well, thank you again for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, Claire does, and who doesn't, catch me during the week on TV News with my latest political stories and updates. And of course, don't forget our website with all our best reporting on politics, gbnews.com. Until next time, now, from me and Claire Fox, cheerio.
Bye-bye.